Now, as, as I mentioned at the outset, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is headed to Beijing next week for talks with her counterparts there. What do you anticipate might come from those meetings? They come at a time when the U.S. is pushing to de-risk its economic relationship with China. Chinese officials, as recently as yesterday, pushing back on that idea. They are not persuaded by the shift in tone from the word decouple to de-risk. They still see it as a big negative for their economy and their relationship with us. What might come out of the Yellen visit, if anything?
So, David, Americans tend to focus on each individual visit and each news story. The Chinese are focusing on the overall relationship, which is not in good shape, but there's some efforts to at least sort of stabilize it. I think the Chinese would be more willing to try to move towards cooperation in the economic area than they will, obviously, in the security area. I think Secretary Yellen's been pretty cautious, and I don't know how much room that she has to give on those topics. So it's better that they're talking, but I think there's a fundamental problem here of breakdown of trust and reliability. And let me just give you another diplomatic example of this. So actually, this is a piece I wrote for the Washington Post when you had the balloon incident, and you remember that Secretary Blinken sort of canceled his visit, and then the Chinese tortured Blinken in terms of coming back. I would have gone ahead with the visit. I would have shot down the balloon, but I would have clearly the Chinese, this was a mistake. I don't even think Xi was aware of the balloon being over the United States. He was probably aware of the program. I think there's some intelligence to that effect. They were humiliated. But that's actually the moment to go and say, look, we'll take the political heat by coming to talk to you, but we're going to have a dialogue, whether it's airplanes, whether it's nuclear issues, whether others, where we avoid these sort of risks. Instead, you see, what the Chinese have concluded is because of the politics in the United States, the Biden administration won't run any political risks. And so then the Chinese say, well, why should I run any political risks? So we're in a dangerous position. I'm not trying to say that, be sympathetic just to the Chinese side. I mean, just to give you another anecdote, I got to know Xi Jinping pretty well too. And when he became leader in 2012, I was just leaving the World Bank. We had done a report with the Chinese reformists about the next stage of reform. And I had a chance to meet Xi and kind of try to say, well, what are your development priorities? And I'll always remember his answer. He said, the 86.68 million members of the Communist Party. And I remember because the numbers are transversed. It's probably now about 95 million people. And David, I'd spoken to a lot of presidents and prime ministers and chancellors about economic policy, and not one would have given me their party membership if I asked them about their priorities. So it's pretty clear where Xi Jinping was trying to go with the Communist Party and its leadership. Right. But I think if you talk about the Yellen visit, let's think where maybe the two countries could start to have some progress together. So you might have reported or noticed there was a debt restructuring deal with Zambia in Africa. And you've undoubtedly noted a lot of the Chinese banks and lending organizations have built up the debt in Africa. And there's been a problem with restructuring these, as we've done in the past through something called the Paris Club with other developed countries, because China didn't want to take the hit. Well, frankly, both sides could help each other in the developing world if we do more of these types of arrangements. A one that I would pick, but I'm a minority here, is the Trump tariffs have done nothing for national security, and all they've done is raise the costs for both sides. So I'd start to reduce some of those tariffs. But I think this visit, along perhaps with one that Secretary Raimondo will make, create opportunities. But the fundamental distrust, the sense that the U.S. is not going to be willing to do much because of the politics here, I think this is going to make it tense, particularly related to Taiwan. And I think you've got elections coming up in Taiwan. You could see that this came up in the Blinken visit. And I'll assure you, based on my experience, that Secretary Yellen will hear a lot about Taiwan too.